The Gilded Age spanned from the 1870s to the early 1900s. It was coined the Gilded Age by Samuel Clemens, also known as Mark Twain, because it looked golden on the outside, but it was full of corruption on the inside. During the Progressive Era, a group of investigative journalists called Muckrakers sought to end this corruption. John D. Rockefeller was a businessman who successfully monopolized the oil market with the Standard Oil Trust through many corporate deals from 1870 to 1911. Ida Tarbell was a female muckraker who almost single-handedly orchestrated the takedown of the Standard Oil Company by taking a stand against commercial Machiavellianism through her journal published in McClure's magazine. Who did Ida Tarbell stand up for? Why did she stand up for them? And how did she stand up against monopolies? Ida Tarbell used the power of media to stand up for the lower and middle classes, who lost their business and money to monopolies such as the Standard Oil Trust during the Gilded Ages. Standard Oil was first exposed for being corrupt when Ida Tarbell published the first series of her journal, The History of the Standard Oil Company, in 1902 in McClure's magazine. However, it would take another 9 years until the Supreme Court would order the Standard Oil Company to be broken up for the violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. Ida Tarbell was just one of the muckrakers who took a stand through the power of the media for the lower middle class citizens against big business monopolies. John Davison Rockefeller was born on July 8, 1838 in Richford, New York. Born as the son of a pitchman, he grew up in the world of business. He saw his father sell people an elixir that would cure cancer. This would inspire him to use every trick he knew to get him to the top. As a young boy, he took every job he could get his hands on, from raising turkey to selling candy. He was even reported to have loaned a man $50 and charged 7% interest on it. Later on in life, Rockefeller would reflect on his life and say,
"The impression was gaining ground with me that it was a good thing to let the money be my servant and not make myself a slave to the money."
Rockefeller ended up finishing high school and continuing his education as a bookkeeper in a commercial college. At the age of 16 and 3 months into college, he found his first real job at a Cleveland commission firm which sold grain along with coal and other commodities. 4 years later, in 1859, he and a partner decided to create their own commission firm, which grossed around $450,000 in the first year of trading. In 1863, with the money he saved up from this company, he and several partners decided to invest in a Cleveland refinery to get their foot in the fastly growing oil industry. The next year, in 1864, Rockefeller married Laura Celestia Seti Spellman and would later go on to have 4 daughters and 1 son. In 1870, John D. Rockefeller founded Standard Oil. Ida Tarbell, one of the most famous muckrakers, was born in 1857 in Hatch Hollow, in western Pennsylvania's oil region. Her father, Frank Tarbell, built storage tanks for oil, but was prosperous when he switched to oil production and refining. That was until February 1872, when Standard Oil and Rockefeller forced the small oil producers of Ohio and western Pennsylvania to sell their businesses. This is known as the Cleveland Massacre. One of Frank Tarbell's issue with Standard Oil was that
it was turning the men of the oil region into hired men. Mighty prosperous hired men, some of them, but nevertheless taking orders.
he did not agree with the idea of Rockefeller turning hardworking men into working servants. Rockefeller had an alliance with all of the railroad companies and had asked them to raise the shipping fees. This would make it impossible for small oil producers to ship their oil, and therefore they had to sell their businesses to Rockefeller. This lasted for 6 weeks until March 1872. Frank Tarbell stood up against Rockefeller but could barely make a living. This made Ida Tarbell's childhood really rough, which became an inspiration for her later writings. During her earlier years, Ida Tarbell went on to study biology at Allegheny College in Medville, a college who only accepted 19 different women over the course of 6 years. Then she found that her interests were not in how the natural world worked. She was more interested in writing. She went on to pursue her career as a writer. With this career, she stood up for the poor against Rockefeller using media. A monopoly is defined as the exclusive possession or control of the supply or trade in a commodity or service. Rockefeller was able to gain an exclusive control of the oil market with his company, Standard Oil, which resulted in a monopoly that took over America.
He iron-handedly ruined competitors by cutting prices until his victim went bankrupt or sold out, whereupon higher prices would be likely to return.
In 1899, Rockefeller was able to corner 90% of the Standard Oil Company and was branded the Industrial Octopus. When asked about how he was able to become so successful, Rockefeller responded with,
I ascribe the success of Standard to its policy to make the volume of its business large through the merit and cheapness of its products. It has spared no expenses in finding and utilizing the best and cheapest methods to manufacture. It has sought for the best superintendents and workmen and paid the best. It has not hesitated to sacrifice old machinery and plants for new and better ones. It has placed its manufactories where they could supply. At the least expense, it has sought markets for its principal products, for all byproducts, sparing no expense in introducing them. It has not hesitated to invest millions of dollars in methods of cheapening the gathering and distribution. It has erected tank stations to cheapen storage and delivery. It has spared no expense in forcing its products into the market of the world. It has had faith in American oil and has brought together millions of money for the purpose of making it what it is.
Between the years of 1890 and 1915, antitrust legislation laws were passed under the Harrison and Wilson administrations in order to restrict trust from monopolizing a market. In Ida Tarbell's autobiography, All in a Day's Work, she reflected on one secret deal that Rockefeller had made with Congress.
Roosevelt soon learned something of what was going on. It is not certain how much, and when he saw his measure in danger, he gave out the statement that John D. Rockefeller had wired his friends in the Senate. We are opposed to any antitrust legislation. It must be stopped. The last thing in the world that John D. Rockefeller would have done was to send such a telegram to anybody. Probably Mr. Roosevelt knew that, but somebody in the Standard was passing on such a word, and Mr. Rockefeller was the responsible head of the organization. His name did the work. Congress passed the bill in a hurry.
November 1902 marked the first publication of Ida Tarbell's relentless 19-part series on Standard Oil and John Rockefeller in McClure's magazine. In this series, she took a stand against Standard Oil by exposing secret deals and the unethical tactics that Rockefeller used for success. She would turn this 19-part series into a book called The History of Standard Oil, which was published in 1904.
A few refiners outside the region concocted a marvelous scheme which they had the persuasive power to put over the railroads. A big scheme by those in the ring would be able to ship crusade and refine oil more cheaply than anybody outside. Those in the South Improvement Company, as the masterpiece was called, were to be rewarded for shipping, and not those in to be doubly penalized.
The result of this directly affected Ida Tarbell's life. She described this as a blow between the eyes to the town she lived in. The town was
self-dependent in all but transportation, and locally and through the pipelines, it was dependent on the railroads for carrying of its crude oil to outside refining points, and for shipping of both crude and refined to the seaboard.
This allowed the man who produced the oil to be able to set the price of the crude and refined oil. Another story that she covered was the Pittsburgh Plan. This is where Rockefeller wanted to become more transparent with his company while still maintaining a monopoly. In Chapter 4 of the History of Standard Oil, Ida Tarbell said,
This company was to be an open instead of a secret organization, and all refiners were to be allowed to become stockholders in it. The owners of the refineries who went into the combination were then to run them in certain particulars according to the direction of the board of the parent company. That is, they were to refine only such an amount of oil as the board allowed, and they were to keep up the price for their output as the board indicated. The buying of the crude oil and the arrangements for transportation were also to remain with the directors. Each stockholder was to receive dividends whether his plant operated or not.
U.S. Attorney General Charles Bonaparte officially filed an antitrust lawsuit against Standard Oil on November 15, 1906. An overwhelming number of evidence was presented to the court, most of which was followed by Ida Tarbell's journal. The evidence presented is as follows. Standard Oil's conspiracy with railroads for preferential treatment, manipulating wholesale and retail prices, spying on competitors, and establishing subsidiaries under false pretenses. The Supreme Court ruled to break up Standard Oil into 34 different companies in 1911. Ida Tarbell was able to stand up for the lower middle classes by exposing Standard Oil. Ida Tarbell inspired many generations of journalists to use the power of media to stand up against corruption. One example is the 2016 presidential election. An investigative journalist, David Farn, exposed Donald Trump's charitable organization for taking assets from his charity and using it for his personal needs. A news outlet can take a stand against corporate entities by exposing their corruption. After 86 years, Ida Tarbell passed away, and her greatest accomplishment was taking down a massive corporate entity.